welcome once again to the GSMC Football Podcast. I am your host once again, Matthew Quinn. We are, as always, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network, and we thank you all for joining us today. Today we do have a great show for you. We'll be covering a lot of things, pretty much kind of a slow day as far as free agency is concerned, as all of the big deals sort of already happened. So it was just kind of just a matter of just confirming and finalizing a lot of deals that we already knew about. But there were some moves, so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to get into a couple of season outlooks. We're going to begin our NFC coverage in the season outlooks, and we're going to be covering the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings. And then later in the show, make sure you stick around because I'm going to be talking about who I think is winning free agency as of right now in terms of teams. But before we start, I would just like to ask that you guys like and follow the show as always. If you've got a question during the show, we definitely do want to hear it. So if you want, you can go ahead and type in your question to the Super Chat. Your input is always a big part of the show, and it's always a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and your insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or just an opinion that you just want to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that as well. You just use the Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we do appreciate every single bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit that Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. And if you do prefer, you can also go to the GSMCsports.net website to tip, donate, and leave a comment or a question there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support. So as always, we're thankful to have you as part of our community. And again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. All right, so let's go ahead and get into our first segment of the day. We're going to just kind of be covering some of what had happened or what happened over the past day or so, and some of the stuff we didn't necessarily get a chance to cover on last night's show. But there were a few things that happened. Most namely, we kind of touched on it on one of my shorts yesterday that I did because it happened right after we went live here, but that was Joey Bosa ending up signing with the Buffalo Bills shortly after the Von Miller release. So that was a 1-year, $12 million deal for Joey Bosa. I know there was a lot of talk about him potentially going to San Francisco to team up with his brother Nick Bosa, but that ultimately did not happen, and the Bills get Joey Bosa to beef up that defensive line and that pass rush. They also did end up signing another defensive player, and that was Larry Ogunjobi, the defensive tackle who was a free agent after he was released by the Steelers a couple days ago. They signed him to a similar deal, 1 year, $8.3 million. So they shore up their defensive line at least a little bit, and they do it at a pretty, easy price, pretty cheap price for the most part, So Larry Ogunjobi was pretty good for the Steelers overall. He struggled with injuries from time to time, and he would miss a lot of practices just due to his age and his tendency to, be injured. But for the most part, when he was on the field, he was a quality defensive tackle. So overall, good move for the Bills there. At the very least, they've got a depth guy if he doesn't end up being a starter there. But Joey Bosa, of course, is a really big move. Bosa just didn't really work out and was a kind of a cap casualty a little bit for the Chargers there to free up some cap space when they released him. So the Bills, of course, they take advantage of that. And another deal, speaking of the Bills, their rivals, who they always play and unfortunately lose to in the playoffs, are the Kansas City Chiefs, and they restructured the contracts of Mahomes and of Chris Jones. That freed up nearly $50 million in cap space, so you got to think that they're probably going to try and make some moves here as free agency officially kicks off, as it did today at 4 p.m. when the new league year officially started. So look out for the Chiefs to maybe make some moves in the next coming days or so. The Steelers added some depth on the running back position after they lost Najee Harris to the Chargers, and that news broke last night. But they add Kenneth Gainwell from Philly. So not a guy that's going to be your starter over Jaylen Warren. It's seeming like Jaylen Warren is most likely going to be the number one guy there. But Kenneth Gainwell has some experience, obviously, and he was effective at times when he came in for Philly. Different situation, though, because Philly has a much better offensive line than what the Steelers do. So we'll see if he can have the same sort of athleticism, the same sort of success that he had in Philadelphia here on the other side of Pennsylvania. And also another move that happened was Titans adding Xavier Woods, and that was on a 2-year, $10 million deal. So that gives them some, boost or some improvement in the safety position. I mean, there's a lot of moves that the Titans need to make overall anyway, but this was definitely one of them. I mean, not a super flashy guy, especially, now as he's gotten older. In his younger days, of course, he was one of the best safeties in the game, but they get him for a pretty decent deal, 2 years, $10 million, so Titans get a pretty decent player there. Speaking of the Titans, one of their wide receivers moved on to Miami as the Dolphins signed him earlier today. That is Nick Westbrook-Akine. And the Dolphins add some depth behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle with that deal there. So the Titans, that just kind of makes it even all the more important for them to get a wide receiver at some point in this offseason because, they don't really have a ton of depth there at that position. So they might, look into, the wide receiver position in the draft, maybe not with that first overall pick that they have, as they have more pressing needs, of course. Whether or not they decide they want to keep going with Will Levis or maybe they draft a quarterback with that first pick, only time will tell as the draft is rapidly approaching here in the next couple weeks or so. But some more moves that happened was the Seahawks. They made a couple moves today. They signed wide receiver Marquez Valdez-Scantling to a 1-year deal. And the bigger move that they made was former Cowboys defensive end now, is DeMarcus Lawrence. He is signing with the Seattle Seahawks, and that is a deal that is 3 years, $42 million, and $18 million of it is guaranteed. So the Seahawks definitely trying to make some moves after they essentially kind of gutted a lot of the players that they've had under contract, most notably, of course, Geno Smith going to the Raiders in a trade, and then, of course, DK Metcalf going to the Steelers in a trade. But they also lost Tyler Lockett, too, which was another, good receiver who's, on the back end of his career, but is still effective. So they needed somebody to refill some of those spots. And I'm sure they are not done in terms of adding receivers, because right now they've just got Jackson Smith and Jigba and now Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who is not necessarily 100% consistent. He's had good years when he was in, Kansas City and, even in Green Bay, but he's had a lot of other issues where he's just not catching the ball. That one particular year where he had a lot of drops, but then he ended up catching the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl of that same year. So, he's got Super Bowl experience, so obviously you like to have somebody like that who's just got that experience and knows what it takes to get there and all of that. So, an okay signing for the Seahawks. It's a low-risk deal, 1-year deal, not too, not too many crazy things happening. These were the kind of deals that we got all day in terms of the ones that we didn't already know about. Or a lot of these kind of 1-year deals, just depth pieces, backup guys, are who they're signing here. Speaking of which, Panthers signing former Cowboys running back Rico Dowdle to a 1-year deal. And that, of course, is not in any position to take over Chuba Hubbard's spot. That's just basically for some depth and maybe a little bit of a 1-2 punch because Rico Dowdle is a shifty and fast running back, whereas Chuba Hubbard, though he does have some speed, is more of a power back. So there can kind of be pretty much a good 1-2 punch there in Carolina. And they're, of course, trying to improve that offense as much as possible with Bryce Young because they really need to see if he is their guy. And you have to figure that this year is going to be a very important year in Bryce Young's career as of right now. So they need to get some weapons around him. And they've adding some depth to the running back position is a start. But, of course, they still have a lot of moves that they still need to make. Another move that happened relatively recently, as in like or the past couple hours or so, was the former Jags tight end who was a free agent, Evan Ingram, signing a 2-year deal with the Broncos. And the Broncos needed some tight end help. So this, despite a pretty deep tight end class in this year's draft, this sort of fills that need without them having to spend a high draft pick on a tight end. You may see them still spend a draft pick, maybe a late round draft pick on a tight end. I could still see that happening possibly, but Evan Ingram could kind of work as sort of like a pseudo wide receiver as well, because he's, that talented at running routes. And I know he's had some drops in the past, but with the right system, the right head coach, you've got Sean Payton, who is an offensive-minded coach. So that will, benefit Evan Ingram, I think. And especially adding more weapons around Bo Nix is paramount, especially if they want to see a 2-year jump that you typically see in, good quarterbacks or young quarterbacks that have had, decent rookie seasons. You usually expect that second-year jump. So that's what the Broncos are hoping, and just adding more talent around Bo Nix is only going to do, good things for him. So, as I said, not a ton of, things that happened so far. We're still waiting on news of Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers as to where they may go. Russell Wilson did a little bit of news about Russell Wilson. He did. Apparently, he's going to be actually visiting the Cleveland Browns tomorrow, I believe, if I read the report correctly. I believe it's tomorrow that he's meeting with the Cleveland Browns about an open quarterback position, which is kind of funny because they just traded for Kenny Pickett a couple of days ago. And, if they're signing Russell Wilson, chances are Kenny Pickett's not going to be the starter. It's going to be Russell Wilson. So it's just kind of funny, because when Russell Wilson got signed for Pittsburgh, Kenny Pickett was still on the roster. And when Russell Wilson got signed, it was largely believed that he was going to be the starter over Kenny Pickett. So it's just kind of funny that he's essentially, if he gets signed by the Browns, would be taking Kenny Pickett's job twice. So it's just pretty funny. But we'll see what happens with that. The Aaron Rodgers saga could potentially go on for days or even a week or more. It's just kind of what usually happens with a player like that. But we'll see if he, decides, or if we get some sort of news here in the next hours or so, or maybe next day or so. We'll see. Only time will tell. There's not really a timeline. There hasn't really been a timeline on, Aaron Rodgers right now. So we'll just kind of have to see what happens with that. So, but that should do it for the first segment here. But when we do come back, we're going to dip into some of our season outlooks, and we're going to be talking about the Chicago Bears first as we move on over to the NFC side of our season outlook. So just give us just a couple minutes, and we will be right back right after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, welcome on back to the show. We're going to be getting into our second segment of the show here in just a second. Before we do that, I do want to just remind you guys that if you have any questions or comments, just drop them in the super chat. Any sort of comments or support is definitely appreciated. So just drop your comments in the super chat and we'll get to some of your questions as soon as we possibly can. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the second segment of our show. We're going to be getting into the season outlook of the Chicago Bears. And the Chicago Bears, they have done a lot of really good things as of late. They've added a lot of depth on the offensive line. They've basically completely revamped that offensive line. So that seems to be what their, main focus is trying to protect Caleb Williams, and rightfully so, as that was a lot of the issue as far as last year when they gave up about 68 sacks. They were dead last in the league in terms of that number. But just to kind of give a review of what happened to the Bears season last year, and that is they finished 5-12. They were last in the NFC North, and of course fired Matt Eberflus mid-season right after that Detroit game where there was that really bad clock management error that cost them the game, or cost them at least an opportunity to win the game there. So he was fired, and the rest of the season just didn't really go too well. For Caleb Williams, he didn't have too bad numbers in terms of the stats, 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but he did have trouble holding on to the ball as he fumbled a total of 10 times and he lost 5 of them. But still, you want to hold on to the ball, and not get into those situations where you're forcing turnovers and all that. So definitely they want to shore up that offensive line, and they've done a great job as of yet, or so far, as we'll get into that a little bit later as far as what they've done. But over this offseason so far, they have hired former Lions offensive coordinator, which was a big, news story there, as a lot of people just sort of figured that was pretty much going to happen. Ben Johnson, head coach, he was rumored linked to the Bears for a very long time, even during the course of the season, especially later in the year when the Bears season ended. He was 100% linked to them, so it's definitely not a surprise there. And he should help that offense, because that offense was 28th in points per game last year with 18.2 points, and they were dead last in total yards per game, second to last in passing yards per game. So, of course, having an offensive-minded coach, and what a lot of people around the league sort of figure is kind of like a whiz kid when it comes to offense, and he has been, at least when he was in Detroit. This is his first time as a head coach, so we'll have to see how that works out, because there's been a lot of, stories in the past where guys have gone in as offensive coordinators and had really, really good success, and, looked like really, really good head coaching candidate. And then once they get the head coaching job, it's not necessarily as smooth as it was when they were offensive coordinators somewhere. So that's always something to think about. Now, Ben Johnson could absolutely be one of the coaches that ends up being a very, very good head coach, because there's been a lot of examples of that as well. But there's always that possibility, because we don't know what he's like as a head coach. He's not experienced as a head coach in this league, but he definitely has really good play calling ability. So we'll see what he cooks up for that Bears offense as they're trying to completely revamp everybody around him, and maybe potentially go running back in the draft somewhere in a pretty deep class. But defensively, they weren't really that much better. They were kind of middle of the pack in some areas, 13th in points allowed per game with 21.8. So that's about middle of the pack, but they were 27th in total yards allowed, and then 28th in run defense overall. So, the defense definitely needs some help there. So we'll see what they decide to do when it comes to the draft. They have done a lot of things, already so far, mainly on the offensive line. They went ahead and got Drew Dahlman at center from the Falcons. They went ahead and traded for Joe Tooney, the guard from Kansas City, and then also traded for Rams guard Jonah Jackson. So they still, have a little bit of work to do, but for the most part, they've done a pretty good job revamping this team. And I do think that they are one of the winners in free agency, just to kind of tease one of my later segments here. But, they have done a really good job. I like what they're doing. They add a couple more pieces, and I think they'll really be, right up there as being one of these teams that could potentially get into the playoffs. Now, they're in a very, very tough division in the NFC North, so they're going to have to get through a lot of teams, a lot of tough teams. Of course, the Lions are there. They have been the cream of the crop of that division over the past, couple of years or so since Dan Campbell has been the head coach there. The Vikings, of course, were very good last year. There's a little bit of questions as to what's going to happen at quarterback with them. They, most likely you would think that J.J. McCarthy would be the guy, but there have been rumors lately of Aaron Rodgers potentially landing there as well. I don't personally think that's going to end up happening. I think it's more leaning towards Aaron Rodgers going to sign with the Steelers, but that's something to think about with the Vikings, of course. And we'll get into the Vikings in the next segment when we go into their outlook. But it's just, of course, don't forget about the Packers either in that division. They're also a really good team. So that team, that division, by and large, by a lot of people, is considered the best division in football, at least most competitive division in football. So, so the Bears have a lot to kind of overcome. They can improve their team and be much better than they were last year and still end up missing the playoffs just because of the division that they're in. So we'll see what they do. As far as some of the options that they need, they still have some solid options at receiver. Would not surprise me if they went out and got somebody else just for depth, but they've got DJ Moore still there. He's still a very good receiver. Roma Dunze was the rookie that they drafted last year. He was decent last year, but of course that offense had a lot of other problems, so he didn't necessarily get what he could have possibly gotten with a better offense and a better coaching staff as well. And they have that this year, at least in the coaching staff department. So we'll see if Roma Dunze can take that big year or that big leap as you usually see in year two players. They could add some players at depth along the wide receiver position, maybe in free agency. Cooper Kupp just got released today, so that's maybe something they look at. Probably a long shot because they probably have to pay more for him than they were willing to pay. Ultimately, I think once the draft comes along, they could look at running back because they've got DeAndre Swift right now. But, who knows how long he's going to be there. He wasn't necessarily the best last year, but again, it's hard to judge a lot of these players on that offense last year with the state of the coaching staff and everything. They were just kind of a mess, and that offensive line was not very good at all, and they're just completely revamping the offensive line, so hopefully the offensive line will be better and they'll be able to run, block, and pass protect pretty well. We'll see what they do at the draft. I know there's a couple guys that they could be looking at. We'll get into some of the mock drafts as we do cover who I believe the Bears are going to select with their pick. And they picked 10th overall this year. So we'll see what we get in the draft with them. And I will go over some of that in the later segments when we talk about the mock draft. But yeah, so far, I do like what the Bears have done. As far as what I think their record could potentially be, I could see them absolutely getting to about like an 11-6 sort of record. Whether or not that's good enough to make the playoffs in an increasingly tougher NFC, that remains to be seen. But I think 11-6 could be a decent record for them. Depending on what happens, of course, anything can happen in the season, whether it's injuries or, they could add some more pieces that could, vault them over Detroit. You never know, which would be something else. That would be quite a story with Ben Johnson in his first year as the head coach, dethroning his former team in the NFC North. That would be pretty interesting to see that. But I could absolutely see them getting into the playoffs. We'll see what they do at the running back position. I think that's a pretty big question right now. There was talk maybe Ashton Genty. I'm not sure. I'm thinking Ashton Genty goes somewhere else, maybe the Raiders. But, there's a lot of good running backs in the draft this year, as we've talked about in the past few shows. Amarian Hampton is another guy that's really good out of North Carolina. They could maybe get him in the second round potentially if they go in a different direction in the first round. If they want to shore up some more offensive line in the first round, that's been talked about too. So we'll have to see what they do at that point. But yeah, so that is just about it for as far as what I think the Bears' outlook is going to be. Again, that's a very, very tough division overall. So it's going to be very interesting to see when all of these teams play each other. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch with some firepower in that division, and some question marks as well. So it's going to be fun to see, how everything shakes out for the Bears. So as far as the next segment, when we come back, we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings. They have also been pretty busy in the free agency pool. They've added a lot of players, of course, finalizing a lot of deals today with the new league year starting and everything. So we're going to get into the Minnesota Vikings right after this. Just stick right with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, welcome on back to our third segment of the show. We're going to be continuing our season outlook series. This time we're going to be talking about the Minnesota Vikings, as they have also made a ton of moves over the past couple of days and just in general in the offseason. Taking a look at what they did last year, 14-3 with Sam Darnold at the helm. They finished second in the NFC North after losing the season finale to the Detroit Lions in a game that would have put them as the number one seed in the NFC, and of course they would have won the NFC North in that case as well. They did not win that game, and Sam Darnold definitely did not look like the Sam Darnold that we were accustomed to seeing over the course of the regular season this year, as he really broke out and had a very, very good year. But they fell short in the playoffs. They were one and done in the playoffs as well, so not a good end to the season that started off so promising for the Minnesota Vikings. Their head coach, Kevin O'Connell, did win Coach of the Year, and rightfully so, taking a team that lost its initial starting quarterback in J.J. McCarthy after they drafted him. And then Sam Darnold comes in, who's been cast aside by a couple of teams at this point, and then he comes in and lights it up, and then they end up getting to 14 wins. So, of course, Kevin O'Connell wins Coach of the Year there. Not a surprise. They ended up being 12th in total yards per game as well on offense. They were 6th in passing with 237.8 yards per game. They drafted J.J. McCarthy last offseason as well, and unfortunately, he was lost in preseason due to a knee injury, so that kind of set all of these things in motion. So, of course, he revives his career with MVP-like numbers, Sam Darnold does. And he, of course, finished with 4,319 yards passing and 35 touchdowns with 12 interceptions. So MVP-type numbers for sure. Of course, MVP ended up going to Josh Allen, but he definitely had his name in the hat for at least, a good portion of the season. Overall on offense, they were 9th in scoring with 25.4 points per game. And Aaron Jones also was pretty effective for the Vikings. Didn't have a ton of touchdowns running the ball, but he had over 1,100 yards, 5 touchdowns, and of course, you can't talk about the Vikings offense without talking about Justin Jefferson. He had 1,500 yards receiving and 10 touchdowns. Not too surprising there. He is one of the best, if not the best receiver in the league. And, of course, having Jordan Addison on the other side to take away some pressure off of Justin Jefferson certainly helps, especially when Jordan Addison is putting up near 1,000-yard seasons, just like Justin Jefferson. He had 875 yards and 9 touchdowns on the year. The defense also was they were a top 10 unit, pretty elite. overall. They had more interceptions than any other team in the NFL. They had 24 interceptions overall. A lot of big plays on defense, a lot of big playmakers as well. Byron Murphy being one of them, and they were able to re-sign him because he was a free agent. So that was one of the question marks in the offseason. They were able to take care of him. So they were also fifth in points allowed and in sacks, so they were really good at, getting to the passer, forcing fumbles, forcing interceptions, forcing bad plays. The defense was very opportunistic in that way. And they were also one of the better run defenses in the league as well, as they finished second in the league. They only allowed 93.4 yards per game rushing. So it's less than 100 yards a game rushing in a season that really saw a lot of running backs have, either revitalize their careers or have their best years, in their careers. We saw a lot of that from running backs, overall. So really good job by the Vikings defense. But the Vikings defense is typically usually always very good. And this time under Brian Flores, they really did flourish a lot under his coaching. So as I said, the Vikings are a very well-coached team. So, there's not a ton of things really that they need to focus on in terms of, execution and all that. They've got the players. They do have a couple of holes that they need to fill. But losing Sam Darnold to Seattle, that essentially assures that J.J. McCarthy will be the starter going forward. There was talk that maybe Aaron Rodgers could end up in Minnesota. Don't believe that that's actually going to happen. But he ends up going to Seattle. J.J. McCarthy will be the starter. As I said earlier, they are going to re-sign corner Byron Murphy. So that, of course, was a big question mark, and they shore up their secondary that way. They did make a couple of moves as well, as they take defensive lineman from Washington, Jonathan Allen, and they also signed Javon Hargrave over from San Francisco. Hargrave was in talks with several teams, including the Steelers, about a potential return, as the Steelers did draft him when he first came out. And then he, of course, went to Philly, won a Super Bowl, spent the last year or so in San Francisco, and now he is over in Minnesota. So definitely a good move for them, shoring up that defensive line. Jonathan Allen is another quality veteran defensive lineman. So big get for both of those guys there. They addressed a big need at guard as well with the signing of one of the better free agent guards that were out there, and Will Fries from the Colts. He signed a 5-year, $88 million deal. So that's one of the higher paid offensive linemen that we've seen. We've seen one deal in Tennessee where Dan Moore had an $82 million deal across 5 years. So this one tops that one. And they also signed a couple of veterans. They signed Ryan Kelly from the Colts also, the center. So, of course, they're trying to get some depth and trying to rebuild that offensive line and protect their young quarterback, because this is essentially going to be a rookie season for him, because he didn't play a single game last year as a rookie. He played in the preseason a little bit, but then he ended up getting hurt and had that knee injury. So you're kind of at a big question mark at the quarterback position. You don't really know what you're going to get out of J.J. McCarthy other than what you saw in the couple of games that he played in the preseason, where he did admittedly look pretty solid. But, a big knee injury to start your career, and, a lot of expectation in Minnesota because of how well they did last year. So it's going to be very interesting to see how J.J. McCarthy handles that. Now, he's no stranger to big games. Of course, he was the quarterback at Michigan when they won the national championship a couple of years ago. So, he's definitely not afraid of the moment. But a lot of the things that I at least looked at with J.J. McCarthy coming out was that Michigan team that he was in, they didn't ask him to do a whole lot throwing the ball. They had a solid run game, and that defense was absolutely vicious. So he didn't do a whole lot. Even in the national championship game, he didn't do a whole lot. They still won that game, obviously, but, there's still question marks, I think, there. I don't think that J.J. McCarthy is going to just automatically come in and look like early to mid-season Sam Darnold, with the Vikings last year. But you never know. I mean, they do have a ton of weapons, for that offense, and I'm sure they'll add a little bit more as we keep going in free agency and leading up to the draft too. But there's still a lot of question marks when it comes to him. So we'll see, we'll just have to wait until he gets on the field. Now, as far as the draft is concerned, they have the 24th pick in the draft, and they could possibly target Texas corner Jahdae Barron in the draft. He is another young guy. He's one of the better corners that are available in the draft. And though they do have Byron Murphy re-signed in the building, Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin, two of their other starting cornerbacks from last year, they are both free agents. So likely with Byron Murphy getting signed, that would most likely mean that Gilmore or Griffin or both are most likely gone. So they'll have to do something, in the draft as far as shoring up that secondary. So Jahdae Barron would be a pretty solid target for them to kind of help, build that defense and keep it young too, because they did sign a lot of veteran guys. So they still want to be very good, but also remain relatively young so they can have a prolonged period of success, in this window that they've just seemingly opened for themselves, depending on the success of J.J. McCarthy, of course. But they built that team very, very well. So all it's going to take is decent quarterback play, and they're going to be in the mix at the end of the year, just like they were this year. I don't know if J.J. McCarthy's capable of having a 35 touchdown season like Sam Darnold did for them, but, we'll see. He's got a lot of pressure on him, and coming off of that injury, we don't know how 100% healthy he might be, so that's another question. I could see them as far as the draft is concerned. They don't have any picks in the second round as of yet, but they do have 2 third-round picks now with the comp picks that some of them got announced today, and one of them was the 97th pick for the Minnesota Vikings. So they have the 91st pick in the third round and the 97th pick in the the third round. So wouldn't be surprising to see them maybe try and make a deal and trade one of those third-round picks and maybe potentially a future pick or possibly a depth player or something to try and get up into the second round so that they can have their full allotment of draft picks in the first, second, and then, of course, third round. Since they'll have that extra third-round pick, wouldn't surprise me if they ended up doing something like that. As far as overall what I think the Vikings are going to do next year, that all hinges, like I said, on J.J. McCarthy and how good he might be and how healthy he is coming off of that injury that kept him out all year last year. It all kind of just factors on that. Like I said, he's got a ton of weapons to work with, so he could absolutely end up being a very good, very efficient quarterback in a system like that. He's got good coaches around him, so there's positive outlook there. There's some hope still in Minnesota despite Sam Darnold, leaving. A lot of people actually wanted that to happen, especially what happened in the last 2 games. But don't forget that he had a very good year last year, and that wasn't by mistake. He just had a very good year. So J.J. McCarthy could absolutely still have a year similar to that, maybe not 35 touchdowns, but he could still have success with that team around him because they've got a ton of, weapons and, not to mention a decent tight end and T.J. Hawkinson too. And of course, like I said, they could add more weapons as we continue to go through this. But I would say I'd probably put them as far as record-wise. I don't think they're going to quite get the 14 wins like they did last year. I'm not saying last year was an outlier or anything like that, but I could see the Vikings kind of taking a little bit of a step back, maybe getting to 12 wins, 12-5 or so, and maybe finishing, I'd say, probably about second in that division because I still have the Lions winning that division until further notice. So Vikings, that's what I have them, 12-5. So we'll see what happens, as the season moves on. So once we come back, we're going to take another quick break here. When we come back, we're going to do a little bit of draft talk. We're going to do some mock drafts. I did the first 5 on another show, so you can definitely look that up and check out my first 5 picks. This will be the next 5. I'm doing 6 through 10, so stick around for that, and we'll be right back with that mock draft. All right, guys, welcome on back to the GSMC Football Podcast. We're going to dive right on into our fourth segment of the show. We're going to talk about some of the mock drafts. I know there's been a lot of them going around online if you've looked into it, a lot of different ones. This is just my own personal mock draft. It may not necessarily vibe with the same one that you might have, but this is just my picks of just what I think is going to happen. And as I said on the last time we did this mock draft, this is not taking into any account of possible trades that might happen. This is just the draft as it stands, as the order it stands right now. Lot can change between now and then, especially with the new league year kicking off today. But let's get right on into it. So with the number 6th pick in the NFL draft this year, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Raiders, they could go in a lot of different directions. Now, they have a new quarterback there, and as well as a new head coach, two former, head coach and quarterback combinations in Pete Carroll, formerly from Seattle, and of course now Geno Smith, formerly from Seattle, as he was traded in order for the Seahawks to go ahead and snag Sam Darnold. So Geno Smith's the quarterback there now. So we'll see what they do as far as building the rest of that team. But right now I have the Las Vegas Raiders taking Boise State's running back Ashton Jeanty. He is the number 1 running back in the draft right now, as rated by a lot of different experts and draft analysis experts. It addresses a desperate need for a franchise running back for the Raiders. The last running back that they had, of course, that was like really kind of like a franchise running back, or at least a solid one, was, of course, Josh Jacobs. They don't have him anymore. He is over in Green Bay. They rode with Alexander Madison and a combination of other different running backs, but he was their leading rusher, but he didn't even get 500 yards. He only had just shy of that, about like 428 or 482 or something like that. But he wasn't very effective overall. So they need a guy that's going to be a game changer and a potential playmaker, and Ashton Jeanty is absolutely that. If you take a look at just his college career overall, he had 4,769 yards in 3 years at Boise State. But the crazy part of that stat is that almost half of it, 2,601 actually, of which came from last year alone. He had 2,600 yards rushing and 29 touchdowns for Boise State last year. He was one of the players that was in the running for the Heisman. Obviously, that ended up going to Travis Hunter. But Ashton Jeanty is absolutely a player that I could see the Raiders going after if he doesn't somehow get picked up earlier than the 6th pick, if there's some trades, or things like that. But as it stands right now with the Raiders at number 6, I have them taking Ashton Jeanty to really, improve that running back room for the Raiders. I think that'll go a long way in them having success, especially under a coach like Pete Carroll, who has been known to like to have a strong running game and solid defense. That's basically what he built in Seattle all those years when the Legion of Boom was there, when Marshawn Lynch, was there, and then of course Russell Wilson there as well. So wouldn't surprise me if he tries to build a similar team to what he had in Seattle, and that of course would include a star running back. So Ashton Jeanty, I think, is a pretty solid pick for the Raiders. Moving on to the 7th overall pick is the New York Jets, and they, of course, just recently signed Justin Fields to a 2-year deal. They have Garrett Wilson at wide receiver, so they need some other weapons, and I could see them going Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State, as they were one of the teams last year that was on the hunt for the guy who ended up going to the team we just talked about in the Raiders, and that was, of course, Brock Bowers, the tight end from last year, was, of course, the best tight end amongst all rookies last year, and he was the best tight end in that draft class last year, and the Jets missed out on him, but this could be a year in which they make up for that and go Tyler Warren out of Penn State. Taking a look at some of his numbers, he set school records for all tight ends with 153 receptions, just over 1,800 yards, and 19 receiving touchdowns. Last year, he started all 16 games as well. He actually even had a touchdown passing as well, and 4 touchdowns rushing. So he did it all, on offense. He didn't, of course, didn't throw a ton. He was 3 for 6, 35 yards, but, still, pretty solid, performance overall in all those other stats. But it's his, route running ability, his ability to go up there and make the big catches. That's what makes him such a, intriguing prospect coming out of Penn State. And he won the John Mackey Award, which is for the nation's best tight end. He would be a really good safety blanket for Justin Fields as well, as he tries to get acclimated to a new system over there in New York. That could really benefit him because, as I said before, they already have Garrett Wilson on the outside at receiver, and he is a downfield threat. And you could bring in Tyler Warren, and he could end up being sort of a downfield threat, sort of like how Brock Bowers was a lot last year with the Raiders. I could absolutely see Tyler Warren having a similar type of year. Maybe not exactly the same numbers as Brock Bowers' numbers in his rookie year were pretty crazy for a rookie, but that's a pretty high bar to try and accomplish. But I could absolutely see him at least, getting close to that, or at least having those, very productive numbers. Maybe like 800, 900 yards receiving, a few touchdowns. I could see something like that happening for the Jets, and it would be perfect because that's just the kind of thing that a young quarterback that's learning a new system wants, is a safety blanket like a Tyler Warren at tight end. Just, tight ends are such, unique targets. They can run routes, some of them, but they're still as big as an offensive lineman sometimes, or as big as a linebacker. So, tight end is always a very useful position if you can find a good one. Just take a look at, some of the great tight ends that are in the game now, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, all those guys. And, of course, they can add on to tight end. Even if they don't get Tyler Warren, they can go tight end because this is one of the deeper classes in tight end this year. But I like Tyler Warren at number 7 for the Jets. So moving on, I have the Carolina Panthers here, and they are looking to try and get some weapons for Bryce Young. And they're hoping that this is the year that Bryce Young shows them that he can be their franchise quarterback. So I have them selecting Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden, who is the fastest wide receiver at the Combine this year. He ran a 4.29 40. He led Texas last year with 987 yards on 58 catches and 9 touchdowns. I would say that he probably needs to sharpen his route running a little bit, but his speed and separation are definitely, very good attributes to have, especially when you have a guy like Bryce Young who can escape from the pocket. It's best to have that speed as a receiver so you can adjust and get open quickly, with that speed. So Dan Canales, the head coach over in Carolina, has made it pretty clear that he wants a big-time weapon on the outside for Bryce Young to really help him out and really get that boost in his game that they really, are hoping to see. But like I said, they can add him through the draft. He has really good separation, can make the clutch catches when he needs to. He's just a great prospect overall. So I would like Matthew Golden there. I could see them going Emeka Egbuka. Obviously, Ted McMillan from Arizona. I had him projected to go to the Patriots anyway, but if he's somehow still available, I could see the Panthers selecting a guy like him as well. But assuming that McMillan is not available, I've got to go with Matthew Golden, who had the overall best combine when it comes to between him and Emeka Egbuka, at least in my opinion anyway. I feel like he's the better prospect, but Egbuka obviously could be an option here too. Wouldn't be surprised if they went that direction as well. So Panthers, I just think, are going to take a receiver regardless. So we'll just have to see exactly who it is that they, end up taking. But moving on to our next team, and that is the New Orleans Saints. They have had a rough couple of years, of course, trying to still rebound from the loss of Drew Brees from several years ago. They've tried different, guys there. They drafted Spencer Rattler last year, and of course he didn't get a ton of playing time because he was as like the third quarterback. Derek Carr has been their starter for a while, and he got hurt last year. So a lot of holes on that team. So for the Saints, I feel like they need to just take the best available player at the position of need. So Texas A&M edge rusher Samar Stewart, I have them going that route. increasing that defensive line pressure. They just did re-sign Chase Young, so they still need a big-time young player, a young playmaker, and Stewart can be that guy. He had a very impressive combine. He was one of the talks of the first day, raised his draft stock, in my opinion. He ran a 4.5 which is very fast. I believe it was the fastest amongst all edge rushers. There was maybe a guy from Tennessee that I might be forgetting, but he was definitely one of the fastest linebackers, or edge rushers in the combine. He also had the 40-inch vertical jump, which was the highest vertical jump amongst players at his position as well. Take a look at what he did last year at Texas A&M. It's kind of a weird sort of thing because he has all of the athletic attributes that you look for out of an edge rusher. You know, he's got the frame, he's got the length, and he's got the speed and explosiveness. But sometimes his stats don't necessarily tell that story. Like he started 12 games last year. He ended up being third team All-SEC, 31 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, only had 1.5 sacks, and 2 pass breakups and 1 forced fumble. And he didn't play in the Las Vegas Bowl, lost to USC. So those stats may not necessarily wow you, but he has that athletic ability, and he showed it at the combine, and it's gonna be interesting to see what he does at his pro day. But at the combine, he impressed, and he showed why he can be an effective edge rusher in this league. He just maybe needs to fine-tune some of his skills, and maybe get a little, bigger, possibly, whatever it takes to end up being a good pass rusher. But I think he has the attributes there, and he's playing in a defense that needs as much help as they can get, with Chase Young being re-signed. Obviously, you don't know how long Cam Jordan's going to play. So, this would be a big-time get for the Saints, I think. So, finishing out our teams here at number 10, we're just going to go quick here. We're going to go the Chicago Bears, as we already talked about them already. I have them taking Will Campbell, the offensive tackle out of LSU. He's the highest rated tackle in the draft this year. They, of course, did just sign Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson to boost the interior of their line, but they still need outside protection as well. So he's a physical run blocker, which of course would help the Bears offense, especially if they go running back, at some point in the draft in a deep running back class. He does need to refine some of his pass protection skills, but he has the potential to be their left tackle for a number of years. He was very good at LSU, started every game except for the bowl game for LSU last year, and he was first-team All-American and first-team All-SEC as well. So he, of course, is a very, very good prospect, and I could absolutely see the Bears going after Will Campbell with that pick. So that covers it for my mock draft, and we've got one more segment left, so one more break that you guys have to suffer through. So just stick with us, just a couple minutes. We'll be right back with our final segment of the day. All right, guys, welcome on back to the final segment of the show. We're in the home stretch now. So we are going to be talking about some of the teams that I think are winning in free agency so far this year and over the past couple of days since we've kicked off all of this madness surrounding free agency. So just taking a look at some of the teams that I think have made some really, really good moves. I think obviously the team that we just talked about in terms of the mock drafts and then, of course, their season outlooks, I have the Bears as being one of the teams that I believe is winning in free agency so far. As we talked about before, they have addressed just about all of their needs so far. Offensive line needed revamping, and they were able to do that with Joe Thuney, Jonah Jackson, and center Drew Dahlman from Atlanta. They also got better defensively with Grady Jarrett coming over from Atlanta, and then Dayo Odeyingbo, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name, but they got him to pair with Montez Sweat on that defensive line. And, of course, the Bears line surrendered 68 sacks last year, so the offensive line was absolutely a priority. They were able to upgrade that. They still can make some moves, especially if they end up drafting an offensive lineman with their first overall pick. As I said before, they pick 10th overall, so I can see them going Will Campbell out of LSU, like we talked about just a couple minutes ago. But, I really like what they're doing so far. They've done a really good job trying to increase everything that they can possibly get out of Caleb Williams. Maybe they add a couple of more guys here and there in the next coming days. We'll just have to see. But, it's very exciting if you're a Bears fan. I know the Bears have suffered a lot over the past several years or so, but I really think that they're starting to turn a corner. The biggest mistake that they made last year was keeping their head coach, Matt Eberflus. Now that he's out the door and they actually have a guy that has promise, in Ben Johnson, I really think that the Bears could potentially even sneak into the playoffs, with like 11 wins or so, like we mentioned before. But so they're definitely one of the winners. Another one of the winners is one of their division rivals, and that is the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, we talked about them also earlier in the show when we talked about the outlooks, the season outlooks. And we talked about a lot of the guys that they had already signed that we have known about thus far. And they've built through the trenches. If you take a look at everything that they've done in free agency so far, they've signed Will Fries, the guard from the Colts, also taking a center from the Colts, and Ryan Kelly. And, of course, they have beefed up their defensive line as well with Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. And Hargrave coming over from San Francisco. Allen, of course, coming over from the Commanders. And they were able to re-sign Byron Murphy. They still need to address a couple of secondary holes. I know I mentioned before that they could possibly go after the Texas corner Barron with their first overall pick. I could absolutely see them doing that once they pick at number 24. They do potentially need to address safety as well. I know Malachi Starks is out there from Georgia. Don't think he's going to be available by the time that they pick unless they decide to trade up. But with Cam Bynum leaving and signing with the Colts, they have a hole there that they need to address. And with as aggressive as they've been to this point, would not surprise me if they ended up shoring that spot up at some point, if not in the draft. But they, of course, still have that big question mark, and that's at quarterback. They have essentially a rookie quarterback, so they do need to protect him. There have, like I said before, there have been talks about Aaron Rodgers potentially signing there. As of right now, as of this recording, I don't know of any news about Aaron Rodgers. If you guys do, of course, let me know. But I haven't heard anything about that, and I honestly don't think it's going to happen. I think JJ is going to be their guy this year. So there will be questions around, how he can handle himself. Like I said in the season outlook, he has played in big games before. He won a national championship at Michigan. So he has the potential to be, a solid quarterback for them. But those are the questions that they have. But overall, I still think they're doing a very good job in free agency, really addressing a lot of the key holes that they needed to address. And they've done a good job so far. That's why I have them as one of my winners. Another team that I had down as one of my winners is the New England Patriots. And it actually pains me a little bit to say that because as a Steeler fan, I have suffered a lot at the hands of the Patriots. But can't deny when they're doing a good job in the offseason, and they are doing that. From the very beginning, from getting Mike Vrabel and then, of course, adding some more guys in there just to kind of, mesh with that Mike Vrabel personality. That's what they've kind of done in their free agent outlook so far, at least. Josh McDaniels is another guy that they brought back into New England to help, of course, Drake May there, but they still need some help at receiver to help Drake May, but they did add a couple of pieces on defense. Most notably, the biggest acquisition that they've made so far is on defense, and that was the big defensive tackle from Philly, and that's Milton Williams, coming off of the Super Bowl championship last year. He was a big part of that Philly defense and how good they were at stuffing the run and, of course, just overall being able to get pressure on the quarterback. So that's a big get for New England. And going into a Mike Vrabel team, who Vrabel, of course, spent his whole career as a linebacker, drafted to Pittsburgh, ended up moving to New England, spent most of his career there, and ended his career in Houston, where he ended up taking a defensive coordinator job before he eventually ended up being the head coach of the Titans. And he was a defensive-minded head coach there, and they had success under Vrabel. So now he's looking to continue his success as a head coach in New England, back where it essentially kind of all started, because he did get drafted by Pittsburgh, but he didn't spend a lot of time there. His career was mainly a New England career, so having him go back there makes a lot of sense for that organization, and that's a good move from them. But as far as who they've signed, they've taken Harold Landry, the edge rusher from the Titans. Also added some linebacker depth with Robert Spillane. He's another guy that actually used to play under Vrabel along with Harold Landry. Both of those guys played under Vrabel's defense in Tennessee. So no surprise that he gets a couple guys that he used to coach. And Robert Spillane is a really good depth piece for linebacker. He was very good for Las Vegas last year. He had some bright spots when he was in Pittsburgh before he ended up getting shipped to Tennessee. But now he's back he's back with Mike Vrabel, this time in New England. That's a decent signing right there. Probably goes a little bit under the radar, as he's not a huge name in the NFL world, but still, good move there. And like I said before, they need help at wide receiver. I have them predicted to pick Tet McMillan from Arizona, the big wide receiver. As I talked about in my previous mock draft, I had them drafting him at number 4 overall. So we'll see if they end up doing that. Don't know how mad they'll go as far as receivers and free agency. I know they signed Matt Collins from Buffalo, but there's not a ton of receiver help out there. You can still get a couple of guys. Big name became available today, and Cooper Kupp, after he was released by the Rams. So maybe they go after that. I know I've kind of predicted Cooper Kupp to go to just about every team on this show, but he's a veteran option that any team that is needy of a receiver, would be foolish not to at least inquire about. So, I think that he could absolutely end up there, especially he's that kind of receiver that just kind of fits the New England mold, really good route runner, can make, crucial catches, short-handed receiver for the most part. So Patriots have done a good job, definitely. Another team that I have here as far as doing a good job and winning in free agency, and that is the Washington Commanders. And obviously the Commanders, they have a window that just opened last year by the, drafting of Jaden Daniels and how good he ended up being for them, taking them all the way to the NFC Championship game. Of course, they were not able to overcome Philadelphia, but the Eagles were clearly the best team in the NFL last year, and they, had beaten them earlier in the year, and they usually do play them close. But the Commanders have a lot of promise now with Jaden Daniels. If he can continue and build on that first year that he had, they could go, big places. Deebo Samuel, I think, is a acquisition that is kind of being slept on a little bit, because he, at the end of Samuel's career in San Francisco, it wasn't necessarily his greatest year. He's kind of declined a little bit in the last couple of years, but I honestly think that part of that has to do with injuries. He dealt with some injuries last year and even the year before that. And also, I think the partnership just basically ran out. And I don't believe that Deebo Samuel is washed or anything like that. So I think he's going to be a solid addition for that team, especially with Cliff Kingsbury being a solid offensive coordinator that they still have there. I could see Deebo Samuel having some really good games, especially taking pressure off of Scary Terry, Terry McLaurin. and he's definitely a top 10 receiver in my mind. So Debo will be the number 2 receiver, most likely, I would think. So that is a pretty solid 1-2 punch if you're looking at offensively there. They did improve the defensive line as well with the addition of Javon Kinlaw. They added him yesterday. And another, pretty good move that I think that maybe won't get talked about enough is they've kept some of their core intact. A couple of free agents they had. Bobby Wagner still playing, the Iron Man. They signed him to a 1-year deal, and he was still effective last year, so why not sign him to one more deal or 1 more year at the very least? And then, of course, re-signing tight end Zach Ertz is definitely a good move as well. But I think the best move of the offseason that they've made so far this year was trading with Houston to get Laramie Tunsil to shore up that left-hand side of the line for Jaden Daniels. And I'm not really sure why Houston wanted to let go of Laramie Tunsil. I know we talked a little bit about them and the teams that were losing free agency segment yesterday's show, but not sure why they traded him. But that benefits the Commanders because they didn't have to give much up to get him, and he's one of the premier left tackles in the game. So that's exactly what you want to see from a team like the Commanders that are trying to build around that really good rookie quarterback, now second-year quarterback, as we start next year. So that's the Commanders. And the final team that I had on this list in terms of my winners is the LA Rams. I like what they've done. They haven't made a ton of moves, but the moves that they've made, I think, have been very effective and definitely for their benefit. Adding Devontae Adams and re-signing Tutu Atwell to help Puka Nacua and help kind of offset that, departure of Cooper Kupp. So they definitely needed some help at receiver, and getting Devontae Adams was absolutely a great move. To have him pair with Puka Nacua, that's a pretty deadly wide receiver duo as well. They also signed defensive tackle Poona Ford to help an already talented defensive line. But their biggest move, I think, has to be keeping Matt Stafford. There was the talk earlier in this offseason that he could potentially even go to the Raiders. He met with Tom Brady, according to some rumors that were out there, and Tom Brady, of course, being a minority owner for the Las Vegas Raiders now. So that was a story that was in the news. But the Rams were able to restructure that contract and get him, back in LA for the foreseeable future. And that is the best move that they could have possibly made this year, because if they had to restart with a new quarterback, they maybe, kind of ruined the window that they've opened for them or reopened for themselves under Matt Stafford. And of course, they were able to also re-sign their Pro Bowl left tackle, Alaric Jackson. So that helps Matt Stafford even more. So those are my winners so far. Another team I just wanted to quickly mention as far as winners are concerned is I think the Denver Broncos are also doing a very good job. I know I didn't really talk about them a lot in terms of the winning teams, but they've added a lot of pieces. Dre Greenlaw, Fuaga from San Francisco. Those guys are, they have had some injury issues, but overall those guys are pretty solid players. And of course they get Evan Ingram today too to help the offensive side of the ball. So I like what the Broncos are doing for sure. So I would put them as one of the teams that are winning as well. But that should just about do it for the show, guys. Once again, I do want to thank you guys all for joining me. This is always a fun time to come in and talk football with you guys. Thank you for tuning in to this GMC Football Podcast. Once again, we're always presented by GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show. Leave a positive review. Really does make a difference. And we also invite you to follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, X, TikTok, and Instagram for more of that content and more updates as well. So thank you once again for joining me, guys, and have a wonderful day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to